Hello, this is part 2 in a series of formerly pricey commander cards, which lost their value with just one printing. This is 8 additional ones. The previous video ended by talking about Mrs. Bumbleflower from the Bloomburrow precons and how she caused On the Trail to spike up to $10. That's the thing about most of the cards in this list, is that they often start out as cheap cards, and then they only spike later once a new synergistic commander is introduced. But sometimes that's not the case, and they are just overhyped and expensive right out of the gate. That's certainly the case for the first card being discussed here today. Bloodroot Apothecary, which was released in the Bloomburrow Commander decks in August of 2024. And it is a 3/3 for 3, 2 and a green. It is a Squirrel Druid with Toxic 2. Players dealt combat damage by this creature also get 2 poison counters. When this creature enters, you and target opponent each create a treasure token. And whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-creature token, that player gets 2 poison counters. A player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game. Bloodroot Apothecary was a $10 card at the time of its release. It was viewed as the latest in a line of counterplays to Dockside Extortionist. Starting with Sardian Avenger, Wizards of the Coast has been trying to punish players for abusing treasure tokens. Kibo, Uktabi Prince, Pain Distributor, and Charismatic Conqueror all tried to nerf treasure tokens, to varying degrees of success. Bloodroot Apothecary was seen as the most extreme attempt at discouraging treasures. When it was released, people wondered if this would be enough to counter Dockside Extortionists. We never got to find out. A month after Bloodroot Apothecary was printed, Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, and Mana Crypt were all banned from the format, and Commander we knew was changed forever. In the year since its release, Bloodroot Apothecary went from a $10 card down to a $2 card. That's an 80% decrease. If Dockside Extortionist hadn't been banned in the format, would Bloodroot Apothecary have proven an effective counter and kept its high price tag? We'll never know. All I know is it's never been cheaper to add this anti-treasure tech to your green decks. Metamorphosis Fanatic. It was released in the Duskmourn Commander decks in September 2024. And it is 6 mana for a 4/4 human cleric with lifelink. And it says, when Metamorphosis Fanatic enters, return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it. And then it also has Miracle for 2, so you can cast it for the Miracle cost if it's the first card you've drawn this turn. When the Duskmourn Commander decks were released, Metamorphosis Fanatic was sitting around $14, so it was pretty expensive right out of the gate. I wanted to wait for the price to drop a little bit. But instead, a month later, the card had shot up to $29. This was another instance where legacy playability was helping to fuel the price. 3 copies of Metamorphosis Fanatic were being played in various reanimator deck lists in Legacy. As I've alluded to before, though, legacy demand by itself isn't enough to sustain a high card price. In just 10 months' time, Metamorphosis Fanatic went from $29 to $6 for a 79% decrease. The card is at an all-time low right now. I could see this getting a reprint in future Commander products, but I don't see the current version dropping much lower without a reprint. If, like me, you've been waiting to pick this card up, now may be your best chance to get Metamorphosis Fanatic. And speaking of the Duskmourn precons, the next card on the list is Séance Board. So Séance Board was also printed in the Duskmourn Commanders in September 2024, and it's an artifact for 2 mana, and it has Morbid. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, put a soul counter on this artifact. And then you can tap to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of soul counters on this artifact. And you can spend this mana only to cast instant, sorcery, demon, and spirit spells. Now, this is an interesting one. Séance Board wasn't a high value card out of the gate. It was selling for $1 at the time of release, but then a month later it shot up to $9. It wasn't due to synergies with a new commander or play in Eternal formats like Legacy. No, Séance Board jumped in price due to pure speculation. New mana rocks that cost just 2 mana are pretty rare in modern Magic design. They've really been pushing towards 3 mana rocks, which have additional utility. People just reasoned that $2 was undervalued for a new 2 mana rock, even if you were limited to what you could cast with it. But the hype just wasn't sustainable. It went from $9 in October to $5 next month in November, and today it's back down to being worth just $1. It seems like a decent card with niche appeal. If you're a demon or a spirit tribal deck, this seems like a no-brainer. I like it in Spellslinger decks with token synergies. I'm going to try it out in my Kaikar Zephyr Awakener deck. Séance Board seems great for any commander that makes tokens off of instants or sorcery cards. And speaking of cards which make tokens, Jacked Rabbit from the Bloomburrow Commander deck was released August of 2024. And Jacked Rabbit, yes, that is its name, is a 1/2 for X, 1, and a white. It's a Rabbit Warrior with Ravenous, so the creature enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters. When this creature attacks, create a number of 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens equal to this creature's power. I think it's funny that this has the Ravenous keyword ability, as that was one that was made for the Tyrannid decks in the Warhammer 40k Universes Beyond. So this is the first time we've seen a keyword ability created for Universes Beyond appear on an in-universe Magic card, and also the first one to appear in white. So it's a very interesting for that reason alone. But here's a card which sold for $2 at the time of release, and has had not one, but 2 separate double-digit spikes in the span of a year. The first spike happened a few weeks after the Bloomburrow Commander decks came out. Jacked Rabbit shot up to $10. This was partially fueled by application in a Legacy Boros aggro deck. The price quickly retracted back to $5, which is where it stayed for months, until the release of Magic Foundations. With the release of Heir Apparent, people wanted to build Rabbit tribal decks. This sent the demand for Jacked Rabbit skyrocketing to $19 in January. The hype from Heir Apparent faded quickly, though. A month later, Jacked Rabbit went from its high of $90 back down to $5, and it's currently sitting at around $4 for a 79% decrease. So just because a card has had one double-digit price spike, don't assume it cannot have additional price spikes. Jacked Rabbit saw 2 double-digit price spikes in 1 year. And speaking of Bloomburrow Commander cards, Hazel's Brewmaster is a 3/4 for 3 and a black. It is a Squirrel Warlock with Menace, and it says, whenever this creature enters or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and create a food token. Food you control have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with this creature. This card was only a couple of bucks at the time of its release. I bought up a dozen copies of Hazel's Brewmaster. Exiling cards and giving your cards the abilities of the exiled cards? It sounds like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which is a $50 card. The mechanics are a bit different. You're granting the abilities to food tokens as opposed to granting them to your creatures. But in some cases, it works even better to give them to artifact tokens than to give them to your creatures. So if you exile a Devoted Druid, your food tokens can produce infinite green mana. It doesn't matter how many -1/-1 counters you place on your food tokens to untap them, they'll still tap for green mana. So we did it, everybody. We finally broke Devoted Druid. But seriously, 3 months after Hazel's Brewmaster came out, the price shot up to $10. By January, it was a $16 card. But since the start of the year, the price has slowly retracted from the high of $16 down to $4 for a 75% decrease. As more Bloomburrow precons were printed, the supply caught up with the demand. Hazel's Brewmaster is one of those cards where at $2, it felt easy to predict the spike. The effect was too novel and too similar to an expensive mythic rare card. I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about cards printed this year, starting with Aetherdrift. Renewed Solidarity was printed in Aetherdrift in February of 2025. It is an enchantment for 2 and a white. It says, as this enchantment enters, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+0. And at the beginning of your end step, for each token you control of the chosen type that entered this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. So Renewed Solidarity was pretty pricey right out of the gate. Token doublers are notoriously expensive, and sellers price this accordingly. Renewed Solidarity turned out to be more niche than your typical doubling effect, however. It only triggered at the end of your turn, so you got no benefit from flashing in tokens, and it also only doubled one type of creature token, so it was really limited to tribal decks. One positive thing is that the name is pretty generic. It's not tied to a specific plane, which makes it easier to reprint. I could see this definitely getting a reprint in a future Commander Precon. WotC tends to be pretty cautious about reprinting doubling effects. They use effects like Doubling Season as a means of selling sets. So I expect this to eventually get a reprint in a Commander Precon, but I think WotC may wait for the price to go up first. Renewed Solidarity started as a $15 card in February, but has since settled down to around $5 for a 67% decrease. I wouldn't expect the price to drop too much more. It's already one of the better budget options for token doubling effects. If you want one for a go-wide tribal tokens deck, now's a good time to pick one up. And speaking of good pickups, Infantry Shield from Dragonstorm, printed in April 2025. Infantry Shield is an artifact equipment for 2 and a red. Equipped creature has Menace and Mobilize X, where X is its power. Whenever it attacks, create X tapped and attacking 1/1 red warrior creature tokens, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, and then equip for 2. This card holds a special place in my heart. It was what prompted me to start posting videos to this channel every week. When I saw this card was selling for $1 at the time of its release, I bought about 40 copies of the card. When I started making regular updates on this channel, the first video I posted was all about Infantry Shield and how it was undervalued when compared to other token-producing equipment cards. I felt so strongly about it that I just had to tell other people. Most people seem to agree with my assessment that the card was undervalued because within a few weeks of its release, the card shot up to being $10. I was able to sell about 20 copies for $8 each, which allowed me to make 4 times what I invested into the cards, while still having 50% of my inventory left. As more supply came to market, though, the price slowly declined. In 4 months, Infantry Shield has gone from $10 back down to $4 for a loss of 60%. I like Infantry Shield. It was a card I could tell would go up in value just by looking at it, but even I didn't predict just how quickly people would cause the price to spike. And speaking of speculation from Dragonstorm, when Steward of the Harvest was revealed, I also grabbed several copies of that. Steward of the Harvest was also printed in Tarkir Dragonstorm in April of 2025. It is a 3/3 for 4, 3 and a green. It's a human druid, and says when this creature enters, exile up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard. Creatures you control have all activate abilities of all land cards exiled with this creature. I also talked about Steward of the Harvest in the same video where I discussed Infantry Shield. I grabbed several copies of it when they were about $2 each. It shot up to $11 around the same time Infantry Shield spiked in price. But while Infantry Shield remains a $4 card, during the last 4 months, Steward of the Harvest went from an $11 card down to a $1 card. It's currently worth only half of what I paid for it, and a 91% loss from its all-time high. I still think Steward of the Harvest has the potential to go up in price. It just needs the right home. A go-wide, self-mill deck with lots of powerful utility lands. But so that's it. That was 8 more Commander cards, which all spiked in price, then lost their value without any reprints. You'll notice that none of these spikes were prompted by specific commanders. They were either pricey out of the gate, or became pricey within weeks after release due to speculation. It's worth noting that some of the cards in the previous video started out as less than $1 and stayed that price for years before seeing a big spike. And that was due to newly printed synergies. So all the cards on this list have only existed for 4 to 12 months. There's plenty of time for them to spike again, especially as new synergistic cards are released. The Commander cards featured on this list are no longer in the spotlight, but most of them are still worth considering. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content every week. And please feel free to share in the comments if you're going to try out any of these cards in your decks. Thank you so much, and take care. Bye.